First, I want to talk about racist capitalism through Cedric J. Robinson. Capitalism arose organically as egalitarian and as revolutionaries in Europe's formation. Europe started with the barbarians. They promised an exclusion of them. They saw the barbarians as a source of labor and considered themselves more enlightened. Um, Next, the first um, benefiters of racial capitalism was the first bourgeoisie, where commerce was largely local and domestics. It's when the time that church slash lords ran everything. Traveling merchants triggered long distance trading and capitalized on the squalor of poor towns going through famine, war, or sickness. Many merchants were able to free serf slaves and enslave them through wage labor. There was a big growth in population, so they wanted to make more wages to benefit them. And the lower class still struggles, which led to the decline of long distance trading. Next would be Robinson's idea of the modern world bourgeoisie. Different bourgeoisie through European, but the same underlying commitment about trade and targeting poor people. Um, Decisions of prior bourgeoisie opened the door and kept it open for the following bourgeoisie. The dialect and the next section that I want to talk about is the lower orders. The function of the lower class is to provide a means for the higher class to become richer and more powerful. This occurs through violent subjugation, through serfdom, slavery, wage labor, and etc. There was rarely any loyalty from the people towards the state because they were exploited. Many European civilizations have always been always depended on immigrants' labor because of the exploitation of their indigenous people. The effects of this is slavery remains intact from antiquity through medieval serfdom to modern day capitalism. There's a lot of nationalism that goes into racial capitalism as the result, and it is the result of modern day capitalism, kind of like the separation of countries and the how they tax each person. Harem folk ideology, racial superiority becomes a justification for Europe's domination. American slave trade and other things like the original 13 colonies or the encomiendas in the Spanish colonies at the time. And the bourgeoisie still maintains power and control today. The next Another philosopher that helps supports some of these claims is Marx. Uh, Marx brings up a few ideas I want to talk about. First, our ability to work attaches us to a relationship with the dependency in the higher class. Just like from the lower orders, the function of the lower class is to provide a means for the higher class to become richer and more powerful. The next thing Marx says is working becomes nothing more than a means to exist, leading to alienation. Today we are exploited for our labor, and we are commoditized like slaves, except we get wages. Just like the bourgeoisie, they use wages to get richer while keeping their costs low and giving the fake idea that they are getting paid for what they're worth when really they're getting paid underpaid for what they're worth. We also see racial capitalism today with wage gaps between white Americans and minorities, and Marx's labor to power is a commodity like materials or machines, or even slavery, for they were considered the machines of the past. Capital, the next idea Mark brings up is that capital, as such, can only exist in a capitalist economy because it necessitates a relation between the classes of the rich and wealthy and those of the poor. He's saying that if we didn't have capital, there wouldn't be this big class dissociation. That capital allows the capitalist to claim that their workers will only get paid on labor and not really get part of the money from what they sell, as the capitalists use the excuse that they are providing the capital for they get the profits. Next is the existence of capital requires that there be a class of laborers who can never gain ownership of the means of production. If people had ownerships of the means of productions, less people would be more interested in doing labor, and less labor would be required of them, as they don't need to do the labor for the wages. So the just the fact that it exists helps the capitalists keep their labor force large. The next philosopher I want to talk about is Sen from Does Business Ethics Make Sense? There's 5 things I want to talk about here. First is ethics in economic decisions. Sen challenges the view that economies should be solely concerned with profit, maximization, and efficiency. He emphasizes that businesses must be also consider ethical factors such as justice, fairness, and the well-being of stakeholders, not just shareholders. This was the first and the only concern with capitalism. This explains the use of slaves and taking advantage of the poor, as the only concern was profit maximization. And the ethical factors of justice, fairness, and well-being of stakeholders, not laborers or people. Second is market failures and moral constraints. Sen suggests that markets are not perfect, and businesses often engage in practices that can harm society or the environment. Ethical practices, in his view, can help address market failures and lead to more sustainable and equitable economic outcomes. Markets will never be perfect, and the use of racial capitalism probably won't go away, as most companies can make it seem ethically okay when it is not. For example, with Nike and Colin Kaepernick. Third topic I want to discuss with Sen is the role of institutions and governance. Effective governance and institutions play a critical role in fostering ethical behavior in business. Sen argues that the state and regulatory frameworks should ensure that businesses adhere to ethical norms, particularly in areas like labor rights, environmental protection, and anti-corruption. Throughout history, the government has attacked racial capitalism with laws like abolishing slavery and the law that doesn't allow you to discriminate during interviews, which has helped. The fourth topic is the dual role of business. Business, according to Sen, have both an economic role and a social role. While the economic role focuses on profits and efficiency, the social role should prioritize ethical practices and overall good of societies. Most companies, however, in racial capitalism, most companies tend to focus more on the economic role than the social role, and may bend the social role to make it more of an economic role, like how Nike did with Colin Kaepernick by not cutting his deal after he knelt. The last thing I want to talk about is practical implications. Sen provides insight into how businesses can integrate ethical considerations into their strategies and operate. He argues that doing so not only helps improve social outcomes, but can also lead to long-term economic success by building trust, enhancing reputation, and reducing risk. The next philosopher I want to talk about is Velleman. Velleman talks about a lot of things, but I only want to focus on one of his main concepts. The topic I will be discussing is that our reason is our morality. Racial capitalism in the 18th century today has occurred because people think others are inferior to them. However, has diluted over time. In the past, it ranged from blatant slavery to serfdom of the poorer classes. Today, it is very different as laws and societies have the changing of the capital of the company's logo to a rainbow during Pride Month, even though they are not going to supply anything to that population. Another example is the Black Lives Matter movement. Once again, going back to Colin Kaepernick, or the advertising to the black community saying they will support them, but instead taking no action and only making a statement, as it was just a reason to support them and to make profit and growth, not just to like support them medially, but not support them physically. And our final philosopher is Anne Phillips. It's my body, and I'll do what I like with it. I want to talk about other unethical markets and compare it to the racial markets. First, she talks about the body should not be marketed because of an inequality. Is this the same for racial implications? Should we not promote racial or other or use other racial capitalism to gain profit because of inequality? Next is the problem of property language. Confusing our understanding of possession potentially condones an objectifying view of the body via a mind-body dualism. We don't have, but rather are our bodies. In the sense of racism, we don't own each other or exploit each other based off their skin, or like how we shouldn't exploit a woman's body. Caveat: prop language does not necessarily lead us to see the body as a commodity. Problems of prop language. As an employee, you provide the services, the body comes along with you and the service. As a slave, you provide the labor, your body comes along with you and the labor, as you're black and we will take your free will. Next is the servicer body with the service. Risk: disrespected. When, if ever, is it okay to charge for bodily services, and what should be the nature slash kind of payment? When is it okay for racial services? What should be the nature slash kind of payment? It is never okay to charge for someone to charge for racial services. One might hire a group of workers at lower pay because they will accept it. However, they should be paid the same as your average employee. Next is how to distinguish invasiveness. Placing unfair expectations on one sex, namely a woman, with respect to the service they can only reply. In the sense of racial capitalism, placing an unfair expectation on one's race with respect to the service they or forced to apply. And lastly, the problem markets. Markets and these services necessitate and establish upon equality. It's not just racial capitalism, it's the use of the prostitution market, the organ market, and etc. Last thing I want to talk about is the last thing I want to talk about is my case study of the racial capitalism of Israel and the Palestine war currently happening. A little background: the Israel-Palestine conflict has been a race war that has been happening for generations. For a little while, there wasn't any conflict, as Israel was backed by the U.S. and has a fully integrated defense system, not allowing Palestine to be able to attack. However, recently, all of a sudden, Israel started attacking Palestine and sent many Americans into a panic, with a lot siding with the Palestinians. So why did Israel attack? Why is the U.S. still supporting Israel besides being an ally? And what are the racial capitalism implications? First, Israel attacked because they wanted to take over the land of Gaza in order to build a canal through Gaza into the Mediterranean Sea. This new canal would result in billions and billions of dollars in trade, as the canal would be the best way for the West to access the Mediterranean Sea and become one of the major trading points in the world. However, The canal would result in the deaths of millions of Palestinians as they do not want to give up the land. So Israel wants to take it by force. Now, why is the U.S. even morally or ethically supporting Israel? It is not for ethical reason, but for racial capitalist reasons. It is because this canal would result in billions of dollars for the U.S. And the U.S. would rather have billions of dollars than save a group of people who the U.S. was at war with for 10 years and from 2001 to 2015. This is a prime example of blatant racial capitalism that has gone unnoticed by the citizens of the U.S. as all over social media there is an outcry against the crimes being committed by Israel against Palestinians. And the only reason the U.S. publicly still supports Israel is that they stem to benefit from this racial capitalist adventure.